Today, we're taking a close look into a fascinating transformation in music. We're talking Bruce Springsteen.
But maybe not the Springsteen everyone immediately thinks of.
Exactly. We're deliberately setting aside the sort of stadium rock boss image for a bit.
Hmm.
Our mission here is to really unpack the period from, say, 1993 right up to 2020. It's this time defined less by speed and more by, well, by slowing down, by self-examination.
It's absolutely crucial, this era. It's where he, consciously started to dismantle his own mythology.
Right, to achieve something new, something deeper maybe, an artistic rebirth driven by some really tough stuff, therapy, loss, finding this radical empathy.
And that's what makes it such a compelling story, I think. For
Right.
anyone interested in how artists sustain a career, how they evolve past that peak fame moment.
So our sources really map out this shift, don't they? From the icon filling arenas to someone more like a literary chronicler,
Yeah.
a storyteller.
Yeah, and it's not a simple success story. It's messy. It digs into his lifelong struggles with mental health, the E Street Band breaking up and then getting back together.
And huge external events, too. National tragedy, personal loss, all feeding into what many see as his most reflective, most compassionate work.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into it. The starting point has to be that quiet patch. Right after Human Touch and Lucky Town wrapped up in late '92, suddenly the noise just stops.
Yeah, after decades of constant motion, constant sound, it went quiet.
Yeah.
Exactly, 93, 94. These were years of intense internal reevaluation. For the first time since he was basically a kid, he wasn't constantly moving.
Stillness, which must have felt completely alien for him.
Oh, absolutely. If you'd followed his career, it felt
Yeah.
strange, like this massive engine just deliberately switched off. A bit scary, maybe, but also, incredibly freeing for him personally.
The sources really frame this as a turning point, don't they? Where his life stops being just about the demands of the persona, the boss, and starts being about intention.
That's a great way to put it, intention. And a big part of finding that stillness was the move he'd already made to California around 91.
Right, the LA move, which a lot of fans, I remember, saw as him ditching New Jersey, ditching his roots.
Yeah, a total misunderstanding, really.
Yeah.
It wasn't about abandonment at all. It was, well, he needed oxygen. That's the word he used.
Oxygen, like literal and metaphorical space.
Exactly. He needed distance to even see who he was without the constant pressure of the identity he'd built. LA gave him space. It gave him anonymity.
And sunshine, apparently. A break from the kind of emotional weather of New Jersey.
Right. He could ride his motorcycle, walk around, and mostly just be, not be Bruce Springsteen every second.
Mm-hmm.
That California vibe, that dryness, it sort of broke the old patterns, the rituals, gave him room to hear himself think, maybe for the first time in years.
And what he found in that quiet space was, well, normal life. Which sounds simple, but for him it was a shock.
A massive shock. I mean, this is a guy whose entire adult life was defined by extremes, insane tour schedules, overwhelming fame, and this deep, deep emotional repression he carried from childhood.
So the Revolutionary Act wasn't rating another hit song. It was making breakfast.
Pretty much. Making breakfast, changing diapers, yeah, going to the grocery store, coaching kids soccer, just reading a book quietly. Things most people take for granted.
For someone who lived in that whirlwind, those mundane things were completely new territory.
He basically had to climb that mountain of normalcy. He even admitted later, really clearly, that he'd never learned how to live a normal life. He'd only learned how to survive the completely abnormal one he was in.
So this domestic setup, this imposed calm, it wasn't just downtime. It was a fundamental psychological rewiring.
Absolutely. He was building a life structure, piece by piece, responsibility by responsibility, instead of just reacting or running to the next thing.
And that stillness, that different rhythm started feeding directly into the writing.
Yeah, but not the way people expected. He wasn't rushing a new rock album. Instead, he started filling notebooks. Just fragments, little sketches of characters he'd see, images from the desert, lines about people on the fringes.
And his reading changed too, right? More literary.
Deep dives into Steinbeck, Flannery O'Connor, American history. It was like he was gathering fuel, but for a totally different kind of engine. It was becoming clear even then that whatever came next would be, well, cinematic, literary, definitely not just another rock record.
You can almost hear the first whispers of Tom Joad in that description, the focus on the margins, the storytelling.
Exactly. He wasn't writing for the charts anymore. He was writing towards something truer, maybe. That quiet, almost hidden period of 93, 94. It's the absolute hinge that connects the life he had to live to survive with the artistic life he finally chose to live. So yeah, that physical quiet in LA opened up the space. But the real engine for change, the thing that forced him inward, was this intense, often painful emotional excavation.
Which brings us straight to his depression, his lifelong battle with it. He called it his inheritance of darkness, didn't he?
He did. And that word inheritance is key. It wasn't just his struggle, it was deeply tied to his father, Douglas Springsteen.
Can you unpack that generational piece a bit? The sources really stress this connection.
Well, Douglas clearly suffered from undiagnosed mental illness, paranoia, this crushing emotional distance,
Yep.
swinging between, sudden anger and just total silence.
And as a kid, Bruce didn't see illness, he just saw rejection.
Hostility. Exactly. And the fear that haunted him his whole career, really, was the fear of becoming his father,
Yeah.
becoming trapped in that same silence, that same darkness, plus the awareness that depression often has a genetic link. It was a heavy weight.
And the thing that finally forced him to face that fear head on wasn't a career crisis, but something much more personal, much more intimate.
Yeah, it was becoming a father himself. The birth of his first son, Evan, in July 1990. It cracked the armor.
How so?
Holding his own son, feeling that immense, uncomplicated love. It apparently threw the difficult, volatile relationship he'd had with his own father into painfully sharp relief.
That contrast, the love he felt versus the love he felt he lacked,
Right. And that juxtaposition basically forced the issue. He couldn't run from it anymore.
which led him to therapy. And not just dabbling, we were talking intensive, sometimes daily sessions in the early 90s. This was survival.
Absolutely essential. The sources portray it as like a critical intervention. It's ironic, isn't it? Here's a guy who could articulate the hopes and fears of a whole nation in song.
But couldn't name his own feelings.
Precisely. He lacked the basic vocabulary for his own internal world. Therapy, he said, taught him the language of your own emotions. It gave him the tools to recognize sadness, anger, fear, and actually talk about them, instead of repeating his father's pattern of silence or outbursts.
Breaking the cycle.
That was the goal, building the foundation to finally break that generational pattern.
And navigating that incredibly intense internal work. The sources are really clear about Patty Shalfa's role here. She was more than just his wife.
Oh, absolutely critical. She was the anchor, the stabilizing force. She brought this emotional transparency into his life that he maybe hadn't had before.
And crucially, she didn't let him just disappear into the depression, right? Or into the mania of work, which was his old coping mechanism.
Exactly. She saw the depression for what it was, an illness needing treatment and honesty, not some part of his artistic temperament. Her support created a domestic space that was actually healing, not just another pressure point. It allowed him to finally be the kind of father he wished he'd had.
It's interesting, too, that while he kept all this private for decades until the memoir, the music from that time does reflect it.
You can totally hear it. Tunnel of Love is drenched in relationship dysfunction. Human Touch is wrestling with intimacy fears. And then Tom Joad, the album that came out of this period, it's built on this deep empathy that feels like it could only come from someone who's known profound suffering themselves.
So the depression didn't vanish, but maybe its role shifted from just paralyzing fear to something that fueled compassion.
I think it's spot on. It became a source, a wellspring for understanding other people's pain. Okay, so he's done this massive internal work, right? The emotional heavy lifting. And now he's ready for what was, artistically, maybe his biggest risk yet.
Emerging into the mid-90s, which, as you said, was a weird time economically and culturally.
Yeah, this strange disconnect. On the surface, you had the booming stock market, the whole Silicon Valley optimism, the dot-com bubble inflating.
But Springsteen was looking elsewhere. He was deliberately focusing on the people and places left behind by that boom.
Exactly. The migrant workers in California, the towns hollowed out by factories closing, the prisons filling up. He was looking at the hidden costs of that supposed prosperity.
And the key inspiration, the guiding text for this, was Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath.
Yeah, that became the emotional bedrock for this new direction. He saw direct parallels, the Dust Bowl migrant Steinbeck wrote about in the 30s, dispossessed, struggling for dignity against big forces.
He saw them again in the 90s, just maybe with different faces, different accents.
Right. Often Mexican or Central American workers facing similar struggles. He said Steinbeck showed him how to hold a mirror to the country, to see it with compassion and anger at the same time. It wasn't just protest music. It was deeper, more like a moral investigation.
And that demanded a totally different sound. The Ghost of Tom Joad, the album, sounds like nothing else he'd done. It's defined by what's not there.
The absence, yeah. He stripped away the E Street roar completely. It's incredibly skeletal, just his finger-picked acoustic guitar, often very simple, almost folk revival style.
And that harmonica, that sounds like wind.
Like dry desert wind, exactly. Minimal percussion, if any.
Mm.
And his voice, it's right up on the mic, intimate, almost whispering sometimes, like he's sharing secrets, not singing anthems.
He called them prayers, not protests.
Which feels right. They have that quiet intensity.
Let's talk about some key tracks. The title track, The Ghost of Tom Joad, feels like the mission statement for this whole phase.
It really is the moral compass.
Yeah.
That line, wherever somebody's struggling to be free, look in their eyes, Ma, you'll see me. It connects the past myth Steinbeck's Joad directly to present-day suffering. It's this powerful statement of solidarity, saying that fight for dignity is universal.
And it shows his growth as a pure storyteller, too. Tracks like Youngstown, about the Steel Town decline.
Yeah, capturing that sense of betrayal. And Sinaloa Cowboys, which is incredibly literary.
Tell us about that one.
It's maybe the most sophisticated narrative on the album. Just simple, stark language telling this heartbreaking story of two brothers pulled into the meth trade by poverty. It's told with such restraint, like a Raymond Carver story or something, focusing on the inevitable tragedy when economic desperation pushes good people towards dark paths.
No easy answers, just the harsh reality.
Right. And then the album closes with Across the Border.
Which feels like a counterpoint to Born to Run, almost.
It does. It's this quiet, hopeful lullaby, promising rest and peace. But importantly, it's sung from the perspective of someone still trying to reach the dream, looking for sanctuary. It flips the perspective.
Commercially, Tom Joad wasn't huge at the time, was it? Rock radio didn't know what to do with it?
No, it confused some people.
Yeah.
But over time, it's become seen as this incredibly brave, necessary pivot, a moral statement that really laid the foundation for everything that came after. His late career renaissance starts here.
So he finds this quiet, intense voice in the studio for Tom Joad. The next logical step, I guess, was taking that vulnerability out on the road.
Yeah, and if E Street was his fortress, this solo tour was the exact opposite. He described it himself like walking a tightrope with no net.
The staging reflected that, right? Small theaters, dim lights.
Totally different scale. Forget stadiums. We're talking maybe 1,500 seats. Intimate venues where the silence between songs was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. There was literally nowhere for him to hide. The performance itself felt like an act of exposure.
And the set lists were intense, mostly the Joad material, focusing on those marginalized characters, plus these really dark, stripped-down versions of his hits.
Yeah, the concerts felt less like rock shows and more like, I don't know, staged social commentaries, theatrical experiences.
And the most talked about part was often the reinvention of Born in the USA.
Oh, absolutely stunning. He completely deconstructed it. In the arenas, it got mistaken for this patriotic fist pumper, right?
Yeah, famously misunderstood.
On this tour, he slowed it way, way down, played it on this stark Delta blues style slide guitar, sang it in this low, mournful voice. It became this guttural cry.
Forcing people to finally hear the actual words, the veteran's lament, the national wound.
Exactly. It was brutally honest, the clarification. And then there were the spoken intros.
The monologues. They became legendary, sometimes longer than the songs themselves.
Yeah, they were incredible. Part sermon, part memoir, part social critique. He'd weave stories about his father, his own depression, the injustices he saw, the weirdness of fame, connecting his own life directly to the characters in the songs.
So the stage wasn't just for singing. It became this space for public confession, almost like continuing the therapy process out loud.
It felt like that sometimes. Very raw, very cathartic for him, I imagine, and probably pretty intense night after night. It forced even more emotional clarity.
Standing alone like that night after night, it must have proven something significant to him.
I think it proved he didn't need the E Street Band to be Bruce Springsteen, that the core power, the fire, was inside him.
And maybe, paradoxically, standing alone like that, vulnerable, unarmored, maybe that's what gave him the perspective to realize what he actually missed about the band.
I think that's exactly right. He had to prove he could do it alone before he could fully appreciate, maybe, what they created together. That clarity planted the seed for the reunion.
Okay, so that clarity gained on the solo tour leads towards getting the band back together. Although you mentioned the seeds were kind of sown earlier, right? During that brief greatest hit session in '95.
Yeah, they cut a few new tracks then, including Blood Brothers, which has that line about the bond remaining. There's a hint, a promise maybe.
But the real reunion needed more time, more personal growth on his part.
Definitely. Those years of therapy, fatherhood, finding that stability. It fundamentally changed how he saw the band. It wasn't this thing he had to carry or escape from anymore. He started seeing it as, well, as family, as a source of history, life, real emotional support.
And the time apart was good for the other guys, too, right? It wasn't like they were just waiting by the phone.
Not at all. They'd all grown.
Yeah.
Max Weinberg became this huge TV personality with Conan. Little Steven built his own solo career, acting, activism. The power dynamic shifted. It wasn't just Bruce and his backing band anymore.
So when Bruce started making those calls in '98, it wasn't about chasing charts or pure nostalgia.
No, the sources really stretched. It was quieter than that,
Yeah.
more personal.
Yeah.
It felt like the right time for family for emotional restoration. Stephen Van Zandt famously said getting that call felt like getting a piece of his life back.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There was some emotional repair needed.
Oh, yeah. You have to remember, he broke the band up pretty abruptly back in '89. That left scars. So the reunion required some tough conversations. Bruce had to apologize, own his part in how it ended.
That humility, that willingness to mend fences must have been crucial.
Absolutely. That emotional work before they hit the stage was the real foundation for making it stick this time.
And then when they finally did get in a room together, the chemistry was just instantly back.
Apparently, yeah. Just the sound of Gary's bass with Max's drums, Danny's organ, Roy's piano, and of course Clarence's sax. It was that sound again. Undeniable.
So the reunion tour, starting in '99, it was like a celebration.
A collective exhale, someone called it. A reclaiming of something vital. Kicking off in Barcelona, not the U.S., was also significant. And that iconic band introduction he started doing.
The heart-stopping, pants-dropping, earth-quaking.
The legendary E Street Band. Yeah, that was him announcing, partly to himself too, that the family was whole again.
Yeah.
And it felt real this time.
And crucially, this tour wasn't just a victory lap playing the old hits. They were already building something new.
Immediately. They introduced new songs that became absolute cornerstones of this later era, Land of Hope and Dreams especially.
That sort of spiritual anthem of inclusion.
Right, and the incredibly bold American Skin 41 shots, tackling police brutality head-on. That showed this wasn't just about looking back. This was the start of Bruce's Sage era, mixing that timeless E Street fire with a new kind of wisdom and maturity. The reunion was about the future, grounded in their shared past.
So they reestablished this powerful, stable unit emotionally, musically, and then history just intervenes dramatically.
Yeah, 9/11 happens. And that story, almost legendary now, of the stranger pulling up next to him in traffic in New Jersey.
Just saying, we need you, Bruce.
Apparently, that simple plea just declined. It buckled his knees. He felt this immediate sense of responsibility, of artistic purpose.
He understood this wasn't a time for personal songs, but for something collective.
Exactly. And his response was to ground himself in his community. He didn't write from a distance. He went to wakes, sat with families, listened to firefighters, first responders, just absorbed the grief.
That act of witnessing.
That became the absolute core of the Rising. He wasn't writing about geopolitics. He was writing about courage, loss, faith under unimaginable pressure, the empty chair at the kitchen table.
And for this subject, he needed the band, not the solo acoustic guy. He needed that sound of collective strength.
The unity of the band became a metaphor for the unity needed in the country, maybe. He brought in Brendan O'Brien as producer.
To give them a more modern, muscular sound.
Right. O'Brien polished things, emphasized the harmonies, gave Max's drums this powerful contemporary punch, but still kept the classic E Street elements. And the songwriting itself often used we instead of I. It was a collective voice for a collective trauma.
Let's talk about some of those key songs that just resonated so deeply. The title track, The Rising.
Sonically, it's brilliant. It uses that imagery of ascending the firefighter, climbing the stairs, but the chorus, come on up for the rising, becomes this huge cathartic release. Hope mixed with mourning, the build of the music, the harmonies. It just hit a nerve.
And then, in complete contrast, the quiet devastation of You're Missing.
Oh, the track is just masterful restraint. It doesn't describe the event at all. It just focuses on the absence left by the event, the empty spaces in a home.
The coffee cup, the slippers by the bed.
The mundane details become terrifyingly poignant. It captures that sudden vacuum of loss with heartbreaking quietness.
And the song that really became the sort of healing anthem, My City of Ruins.
Which was actually an older song, about Asbury Park falling apart. But he repurposed it. That simple gospel call and response, come on, rise up, rise up. It became this prayer for New York, for the whole community, a plea for resilience.
The Rising was just huge, critically, culturally.
It was seen almost immediately as one of the definitive artistic responses to 9/11. It really cemented Bruce's role not just as a rock star, but as this figure who could articulate and help process national pain.
Huh.
It launched this whole mature, incredibly resonant phase of his career.
So, after the triumph and communal spirit of the Rising, the band enters this period of renewed strength. But then that strength gets tested by something deeply personal, loss within the E Street family itself, starting with Danny Federici.
Yeah, Danny, the organist, the accordion player, often called the Phantom or the calm in the storm. His sound was so crucial to that ethereal, almost spiritual side of E Street. The accordion on Sandy, the organ weaving through the river.
And he battled melanoma during the Magic Tour. Kept it quiet for a while.
Yeah, a really tough private fight. His last show with the band in Indianapolis in March 2008, watching footage of that is incredibly moving. Bruce introduces him, clearly emotional, and they play Sandy. Danny's solo just hangs in the air. He died just 3 weeks later. He was only 58.
Bruce's eulogy for him was beautiful, calling him the brother you didn't need to talk to.
Because the music did the talking. Their connection was intuitive, deep, and the band had to somehow keep going on that tour after losing him.
How did they manage that?
They made a point of honoring him every night, playing songs that heavily featured him, like Sandy or Racing in the Street, dedicating them to him, keeping his spirit present in the music.
And that grief, that experience, must have fed into the next album, Working on a Dream.
You can feel it. Though interestingly, that album has this surprisingly bright, almost whimsical, optimistic feel in places. It felt like Bruce trying to consciously lift himself and the band out of that sorrow through the songwriting.
But there's a direct tribute to Danny on there, too, The Last Carnival.
Yeah, that's the explicit goodbye. A really tender song framing Danny's life as this magical, fleeting thing with that promise of meeting again. It's about turning that raw grief into something like fond, enduring memory.
But then came the loss that felt like it could truly end the E Street story. The big man, Clarence Clemons.
June 2011. A massive stroke. Clarence passes away at 69.
All right.
And for Bruce, for the fans, for the idea of the E Street Band, this was seismic.
Bruce said it was like losing a limb. Clarence wasn't just the sax player, he was the onstage foil, the symbol of brotherhood.
He was the mythological other half. Bruce's eulogy for him acknowledged that. Together, we told a story far greater than the one we could tell alone. His death wasn't just losing a friend, it felt like the end of an era. It forced that huge question. Can E Street even exist without Clarence? Without that iconic saxophone sound?
And Bruce answered that question with anger, with Wrecking Ball in 2012.
Yeah, it was a furious record.
Yeah.
Arguably his angriest since Darkness. But the anger wasn't just grief, though that was definitely in there. It was fused with this outrage over the economic crash.
The Great Recession, foreclosures, Wall Street bailouts.
Exactly. So the album became this potent mix of personal mourning and political fury. He drew on gospel sounds, Celtic folk traditions, that defiant energy you hear in songs like We Take Care of Our Own or Death to My Hometown. It was about turning pain and anger into resilience, his most political statement in years.
And symbolically, Wrecking Ball also offered a kind of closure or continuity regarding Clarence.
A beautiful, poignant touch. The studio version of Land of Hope and Dreams on that album. It features Clarence's very last recorded saxophone solo.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a deliberate choice, embedding his spirit, his sound into the ongoing mission of the band, ensuring his legacy wasn't just a memory, but part of the living fabric of E Street. It signaled that the band was now a lineage, carrying its ghosts forward.
So after navigating that intense period of grief, loss, and political anger with the band, Bruce does another one of his signature pivots, a radical stripping down again, Springsteen on Broadway.
Yeah, completely unexpected. Trading arenas and the full band for basically just himself, a piano, a couple of guitars, and a script in a small Broadway theater for 236 nights.
It was like the ultimate act of taking off the mask, right? Directly performing his memoir, Born to Run.
Totally. He was meticulously deconstructing his own myth night after night. The show followed the arc of his life, focusing relentlessly on what he called the central ghost, his father, and the counterbalancing light of his mother. He wanted to show the audience the man, the writer, the performer, not just the icon.
The staging was incredibly minimal, too, all focus on him and the words.
Just him, the stories, the songs. And he even offered that concise summary of his artistic DNA. Elvis freed my body, Dylan freed my mind.
And the way he performed the songs, they became something else entirely in that context.
Oh, completely transformed. Born to Run, the ultimate rock anthem, became this fragile, almost hesitant prayer at the piano. You heard the desperation in a whole new way.
And 10th Avenue Freeze Out without the band became a eulogy for Clarence, didn't it?
Absolutely. That moment was maybe the emotional peak of the show for many people. When he got to the line and the big man joined the band, the music stopped, silence, and he'd just look up, acknowledging Clarence's absence and presence. It was this incredibly moving piece of theatrical grief and celebration. Made the band feel like family, even when they weren't physically there.
And Patty Scialfa joining him for duets, like Tougher Than the Rest, that grounded the whole thing, too.
Yeah, those duets were crucial. They presented their marriage not as some rock star fantasy, but as real, ongoing work. Two people doing their best to be seen by each other, as he put it. That level of raw honesty on a Broadway stage, pretty remarkable for someone of his stature. Broadway proves you could hold an audience completely captive with just his story and his vulnerability.
And then straight after that intense period of looking inward, he pivots again, completely different direction sonically with Western Stars in 2019.
Another huge gamble, a complete departure from rock.
Right.
This was lush, cinematic, orchestral Americana.
You can really hear the influences he talked about, right? Glenn Campbell, Jimmy Webb, those sweeping Ennio Morricone scores.
Absolutely. Strings, horns, pedal steel everywhere.
Yeah.
It created this vast, widescreen soundscape, totally unlike anything E Street would do.
And lyrically, he stepped away from his own story for this one.
Yeah, which was also fascinating. He sang through fictional characters, aging stuntmen, washed-up actors, lonely truckers, broken cowboys, all reflecting on life, loss, regret, but from a distance.
Finding a new way to explore aging and mortality, maybe, through these other voices.
Exactly. It gave him a different kind of freedom, a poetic license.
Tracks like Drive Fast, The Stuntman, really capture that mood.
Perfectly. This guy's still risking his body long after his heart's broken. That mix of past glory and present fragility. And the album Closer, Moonlight Motel. Just stunning. So quiet, revisiting lost memories, ghosts of relationships. Western Stars was proof that even at 70, he was still capable of complete artistic reinvention. He became this orchestral poet of the West.
Which brings us, almost up to date, to the final chapter in this period we're looking at. Letter to You. And this feels like it brings everything full circle, mortality, gratitude, and the E Street Band. Started really suddenly, didn't it?
Amazingly so. Apparently, a fan gave him this old guitar, and picking it up just unlocked something. He wrote almost the entire album, like 12 songs.
Yeah.
In maybe 2 weeks.
Wow, just a creative flood.
Yeah. And these songs, he said, they demanded the E Street Band. They weren't solo acoustic pieces. They needed that collective sound.
And the way they recorded it reflects that urgency, that chemistry they'd rebuilt.
Totally. They all got together in his home studio in November 2019. Set up, played live, minimal overdubs, no click tracks, just the band playing together in a room. And they cut the whole album in 4 days.
4 days.
Steven Van Zandt said it was the easiest record they ever made, which tells you everything about how connected they were at that point. The trust, the history, it was all there.
And maybe the most telling choice on the album, the thing that gives it its emotional weight, is including those 3 old songs from the 60s, from his very first band.
The Castiles tracks. Yeah, that was crucial. It wasn't just nostalgia. It came directly from the death of George Seiss in 2018.
His last surviving bandmate from that first group.
Exactly. Bruce realized with a shock that he was literally the last man standing from his teenage band. That sense of being the sole survivor of your own youth. That's the emotional engine of the whole record. Bringing those old songs back was like bringing the ghosts into the room, connecting the very beginning of what felt like, perhaps, nearing the end.
The whole album feels like this direct confrontation with mortality, but also with immense gratitude.
Absolutely. It's right there on the surface. You hear it in Ghosts, which is the absolute emotional core. It's not mournful. It's this defiant celebration of lost bandmates, Danny and Clarence especially. That line, I hear the sound of your guitar coming in from the mystic far. Chills. Music as the thing that keeps them present.
And then Last Man Standing itself, so direct.
Yeah, the title says it all. Looking back, acknowledging the friends who are gone, feeling the weight, and maybe the privilege of being the one left to tell the story.
And the album ends on a note of peace, though. I'll see you in my dreams.
A beautiful, simple closing thought. It distills everything down to this acceptance. Death is not the end. It's a promise that the connection remains through memory, through love, maybe through the songs themselves.
And the timing of its release, October 2020. right in the thick of the pandemic, global lockdowns.
Yeah, completely unintended, obviously, but it landed with this incredible resonance. An album grappling so openly with death and loss arrived, and the whole world was isolated and fearful. It somehow became this source of comfort, of solidarity. These songs about mortality suddenly felt profoundly like songs about survival. Hashtag, tag, outro.
So bringing this all together, looking back at this whole period, 1993 to 2020, what's the big takeaway about Bruce Springsteen's journey?
Well, I think the central point, the thing this deep dive really highlights, is that the artistic courage, the wisdom, the empathy of his later work. It wasn't just a natural progression of the boss, it was earned. It was only possible because of that incredibly difficult, often painful, emotional work he did back in the early 90s.
The therapy, finding stillness, embracing that domestic life, that was the necessary foundation.
Absolutely. He had to consciously dismantle the rock star armor, confront his own inheritance of darkness, as he called it, to become the person capable of writing Tom Joad or The Rising or Letter to You. He shed the myth to find the man.
And in doing that, in turning inward, he paradoxically found a way to speak even more profoundly to the world, right? To the collective experience.
Exactly. That deep dive into his own psyche, his own family history, unlocked this incredible empathy. The fire was still there, the passion, but it became less about escape and more about understanding. Illumination, not just combustion. It's really a masterclass in how personal struggle can be transformed into universal lasting art.
He uses music so powerfully to process loss, doesn't he? To keep memory alive, to turn grief into something generative, like fuel. So thinking about that idea, the E Street Band as a lineage now, carrying its ghosts, it leaves us with a question, maybe? For artists, sure, but maybe for all of us. How do you preserve the spirit, the legacy of the people you've lost? How do you make sure that the silence grief brings doesn't ultimately win out over the power of memory, the power of connection?
That feels like the question that really animates so much of his later work.
Yeah, definitely something worth thinking about long after the music stops.
Let's see what he comes up with next. Let's wrap this up. Thanks for listening to Music as a Podcast. See you next time.